Welcome back to the Midlife Mavericks Podcast. I'm your host, StreTch Rayner, and today we've got an episode you absolutely can't afford to miss, especially if you're a man navigating the complexities of midlife. Have you ever felt like you're running on empty, noticing subtle changes in your mood, energy, or physical health, but you brush them aside as just part of aging? You're not alone, but what if those signs were your body's way of sending you critical early warnings? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Rick Davids, a leading expert in functional medicine, who's here to unpack why proactive blood testing isn't just a good idea. It's essential for men in midlife. We'll discuss how conventional medicine might be leaving you at risk, why midlife is the perfect moment to take charge, and what key health markers every man should understand to reclaim their vitality and longevity. So get ready to rethink how you approach your health and discover the powerful steps you can take to shift from passive to proactive living. Let's dive in. So I reached out to Rick not too long ago with this idea to work together. So Rick is a functional medicine practitioner, and obviously I'm working as a health coach and personal trainer. And what we wanted to do is be able to help men take proactive steps in terms of their health, especially men in midlife. We talk about it, this being this really critical point where we can let our health decline if we don't pay attention to it, or we can take active steps to turn our health around so that we can live the active lifestyles, a healthy lifestyle that we want to live in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. So together, we've come up with this idea of helping guys understand their blood work. So doing the blood work and stepping into the blood work, understanding the markers, maybe why conventional medicine is not the way forward. And if your doctor tells you that your blood markers are all healthy or they're all normal, why that might not be the case, and what the functional medicine ranges are and how this is going to help you be more proactive about your health. What would you like to say about this, Rick, in terms of just a quick overview of what we're doing together?
Yeah, so like you said, we're going to give you the opportunity to be able to access a functional medicine approach to blood work assessment. So we can help set you up getting blood testing done via your doctor, or there's the option to basically purchase the blood testing through a direct-to-consumer lab and bypass your GP and get a more comprehensive panel. And then we'll be able to provide you with a functional blood chemistry analysis report, which will be able to give you a really detailed and in-depth assessment of your blood work using more optimal ranges, which looks for patterns of dysfunction and hidden health trends that will highlight key areas where you can kind of hone in and optimize.
Beautiful, mate. So if you're a man in midlife and you know something's off, maybe you're not feeling, the drive that you once have. Maybe your recovery's down. Maybe you're low on energy. Maybe you've got brain fog. Maybe just you're not healing like you know you can, or you're not showing up as the best version of yourself. By investing in blood work, you can start to pull apart maybe certain areas, certain things that might be missing, nutrient deficiencies, maybe hormones are low, lots of different things can be causing this. And with basic lifestyle changes, maybe with supplementation, but just building an awareness around what's going on for you is going to allow you to change the trajectory of how you're feeling. It's going to transform your life. And I can speak personally, I've gone through this myself, and I was in a pretty bad spot when it happened, like just feeling run down, tired, not sleeping well, stressed. And what it came down to was, blood work stuff. It came down to high iron. It came down to heavy metals. It came down to adrenal fatigue. Lots of things were happening for me. And without the blood work, I would never have been able to figure out what it was. It's just hidden and it's unknown. And although I was eating well, training smart, focusing on trying to get sleep and manage my stress, nothing seemed to work until I committed to the process of working with a functional medicine practitioner like Rick, and him being able to point out, these areas and what was going on for me. So in April, I want to share that experience with as many guys in midlife as I possibly can. And Rick's going to jump on board and help us. So together, we're going to start a group where we're all going to go and get our blood work done. Rick's going to supply us with a list of markers that we can obviously look at. We take those markers, we get the results. Rick generates this incredible report that's going to, point the direction of things you might need to work on. You're going to have a Q&A with Rick and myself to ask questions to help you, navigate this. Off the back of, this April workshop that we're going to run, you can book a private consult with Rick. That's an additional cost, but you can dive deeper and work with Rick to really, nut out your health and take control of your health before it's too late. Okay, we're about proactive health here. So I'm excited about this. And this podcast today, we're just going to dive in and we're going to talk a lot more about this topic. So let's do it, Rick.
I had you on my first episode and we talked about the differences between conventional medicine and functional medicine. I think we're going to touch on that just a little bit today. But I'd like to sort of start with, the powerful question of why does this matter? Why do you think men in midlife should be getting their blood work done regularly, let's say?
Yeah. Well, being a man in his midlife now, I'm 43 soon. I'm acutely aware of this sort of topic. But I would say that, many chronic health issues start developing a lot earlier than when symptoms present. And when disease develops, it's often been a long time of, poor metabolic function and systems function. So I think at this stage in a man's life, around this midlife, 40 to 65 kind of range, this is really a pivotal period where a lot of chronic diseases start to sort of show their head, rear up a little bit. And it's a really good opportunity to start paying attention, because if we just let things continue down that road, then this is when more tricky problems start to develop, I would say. So, a lot of people see midlife as like the inevitable kind of like downhill, but I kind of trying to take the position that it's actually the start of our prime. So I think it's a sort of period of time in our life where, a lot of the years before us have started to kind of come together, and the accumulation of stress in our system and poor lifestyle choices are really starting to kind of take hold. And it's almost at a crossroads. You can either just continue the status quo and go down that road and inevitably become another statistic, or you can, take ownership of your health and hopefully steer the course in a much better direction.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. Well said. I think you're right. We, through our 20s and 30s, we can probably get away with a lot if we're not eating the best diet, if we're not getting the right amount of sleep, maybe if we're not being as physically active as we can be. But as we start to approach this crossroads, this midlife, we can start to see our health decline, our energy decline, our drive decline, and we can start to obviously worry about, all of the diseases, cardiovascular health, cancer, a lot of things that could obviously start to go wrong. And if we're not being proactive with our health, like doing the blood work and building some awareness around deficiencies and hormones and maybe something that's not working optimally, then obviously we can start to see our health deteriorate. So I like what you sort of said there about this opportunity right now to take control of our health and well-being. And these numbers can obviously really, really help us if we're looking at the blood work and getting a good idea of what's happening there. Proactive health, I think we just need more of it as men, don't we? We're very stubborn. I think a lot of us are stuck in our ways and we're just like, I'll be right. Nothing's wrong. And we keep pushing through until the pain of where we are becomes so uncomfortable that then we might go and see a doctor and say, okay, something's not going well for me. But that's reactive health. And sometimes the longer we leave it, the worse it's going to get. I want to touch on this just a little bit because it was something we spoke about last time. We talked about conventional medicine versus functional medicine, because I think a lot of guys are going to go, okay, I'm going to go and see my conventional doctor and I'm going to get some of this blood work done, which is great, but it's got its limitations. Can you speak to that a little bit for us, Rick?
Yeah, sure. I guess that the conventional model is very reactive, and they often will just, wait and see until something, significant manifests. Whereas in functional medicine, we're really trying to catch things early. We're looking for optimal health rather than waiting for the disease process to kind of, manifest and shows up on blood work. So typically when you see your conventional doctor, they're going to run, some standard blood work. And because the blood chemistry ranges that they use are very broad, which represent the sort of average person on the street, it isn't until quite far down the road that you might show up with something that's abnormal. And it's almost like, so far gone that it's quite hard to recover sometimes when it's at that stage. So in functional medicine, what we prefer to do is be more preventative and take a proactive approach and try to catch things early on so that we can intervene early and hopefully we can reverse the course of that process. So the reference ranges we use are typically a lot more narrow, so they're more sensitive and they'll be able to pick up patterns and trends before they might, move outside of the conventional range. And so I guess from that point of view, it's all about really trying to understand what's going on as early on so that you know what you're dealing with. And that way you can be empowered with the right information to make the correct diet, lifestyle changes to optimize your health going forward.
Yeah, excellent, mate. I think like an analogy that we could use for that, it's like, your car starts making a noise, it's rattling, and you take it to the mechanic and he said, oh, well, it's still running, just keep driving it, you'll be fine. And it's not until the car breaks down and you take it to the mechanic and he goes, oh, okay, now we'll fix it. And it's going to be a lot more expensive to fix it because the car's actually broken now than if the mechanic fixed it the first time when you went in there and it started making a bit of a noise.
Absolutely.
And
the other thing, I'll just interject this on that same kind of analogy. One of the distinctions between the conventional approach and the functional medicine approach is about trying to address root causes versus just treating symptoms, right? So when that kind of check engine light flashes up on your dashboard, you take it to the mechanic and you kind of expect them to look under the hood, do the assessments, check everything's right. But what happens in conventional medicine is they almost just, cover over that light and just pretend it's not there anymore. And that's kind of like analogous to just taking a drug to cover symptoms, but not really trying to understand what's the underlying mechanisms and drivers resulting in that problem in the first place.
Yeah, well said, mate. I think that's the biggest problem with our conventional medicine right now, isn't it? The doctors are not looking at root cause and they're just prescribing drugs to cover the symptoms. And those drugs come with a list of side effects, which probably means you're going to end up on another drug. So they're lining their pockets, but they're not taking care of our health, which is such a big problem. And that's like, I wouldn't go to a conventional medicine doctor for my health. If I break my arm, if I'm in a car accident, if there's some sort of acute injury, the hospital is the first place I'll go because they're really, really good at that. But when it comes to my long-term health, I just wouldn't be investing in conventional medicine. I'd be looking for functional medicine practitioners like yourself, integrative doctors, people that are going to actually dig deeper into the root cause, ask the powerful questions, get to know who I am, my history, maybe my family history, my genes, and obviously do all this blood work from a functional range perspective to help point me in the right direction of, okay, what are the things I need to be focusing on maybe in my lifestyle, my diet, my exercise, my mental health, all these different things that are obviously going to have an impact on my overall health and how that could affect these markers. And I think it's a very powerful thing to realize. We put a lot of trust into our conventional medicine doctors, but unfortunately, they don't have the skill set to direct us into lifestyle changes, I believe.
Yeah, no, agreed.
A very reactive health instead of proactive health.
Yeah, and that sounds like men come into the clinic with their lab results and they say that their doctor just said everything's fine. What you on about? All their labs are in range. They're a bill of health according to the metrics or whatever, but they just feel absolutely terrible. Fatigued, low libido, overweight. They just don't feel like they're thriving. They know that something's off. Yet the blood work just doesn't show that from a conventional perspective. And I think that's where functional sort of blood chemistry analysis is different.
Yeah. You said it before, and I think it's very like the health system, our conventional health system, and those blood markers are very black and white, or it's very binary. You're healthy, you're healthy, you're healthy. Okay, now you're sick. Like that's all it is. It's not like, okay, your markers are trending in a negative direction, and because they're trending that way, we need to make changes now before you get sick. But unfortunately, that's not what they do. It's like, okay, now you're sick, and now my little flowchart tells me that I should put you on this drug because you've crossed this line. Yeah. But, obviously with this proactive look at your blood work, we can start to make changes. And like you said, we can have huge impacts on our energy levels, our mood, our sleep, our ability to recover. Just our whole lifestyle can be affected if we've got deficiencies or if certain hormones aren't in the right place. Let's dive in, Rick. What are some of the common, scenarios you might see with men, in their sort of 35 to 65 range coming in with their blood work? What sort of things, or even if they're just coming into you and sort of saying, Rick, I feel shit, or I feel like this is going on. What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so they're either coming in, they haven't really had blood work because they're the type of guy that doesn't really want to bother the doctor, and they just say, she'll be all right. Often it's the spouse or their partner that, eventually pushes them in. Or they've got their blood work and everything looks fine, but they clearly don't feel fine. And a lot of the common symptoms I see sort of center around fatigue and low energy states. Often there's brain fog, forgetfulness, and some mood changes. So people, men are just feeling like flat, maybe depressed, maybe a bit anxious. They'll often complain of a disinterest in sex anymore. So they're not getting morning erections and their libido is quite down. they're perhaps, a bit of a gym goer, but they just notice that they can't quite put on muscle mass to the same rate as they used to, despite, being in the gym and so on. A lot of them will complain of excess body fat, especially around the midsection, around the belly, but also around the breast tissue area, man boobs and so on. And then a lot of people will often have, gut issues and other types of inflammatory type of issues that they're presenting with. And it's often all of those things at once. So there's some of the common things I find people present with. And then as part of, the process that I take, we do very comprehensive blood chemistry analysis and just screen all the body systems. We look at lots of advanced markers. We use the tight ranges. We look at patterns and trends, and we're trying to really understand what's going on with their biochemistry and their physiology. And it's not uncommon for us to see, low normal or even clinically low testosterone levels. We'll often see elevated inflammatory markers. Often there's a sort of relative excess of estrogen, more of that sort of feminizing hormone in men. And a lot of the time, men are actually converting their testosterone into estrogen due to various metabolic issues. We often find nutrient deficiencies, zinc, vitamin D, B vitamins, and so on. Blood sugar and metabolic issues, cardiometabolic issues are very, very common. So we see sometimes this reflected in their liver function tests, markers indicating maybe fatty liver. Their lipids are elevated. They have high triglycerides, high LDL cholesterol. Some of the apolipoprotein tests are coming up abnormal. And then when we look at their actual blood sugar regulation, a lot of men are presenting with high blood glucose, high fasting insulin, high hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of like an average blood sugar over a few months. And it's all just sort of painting this story of like metabolic dysfunction, inflammation, hormone dysregulation, and nutrient deficiency. And that's kind of very common, typical presentation I see on blood work.
Awesome, Rick. There's two questions that come to mind when I just hear you talk about that. And the first one is there's a lot of different things that could be going on. And there is obviously a lot of different tests we can do. But walking into your doctor, if you've got no understanding of what any of these tests are, what any of these markers are, chances are the doctor's just going to do a very high level test, aren't they? They're not really going to dive deep down into some of these things that you were talking about. So often this sort of stuff is going to get missed. Would you agree? Or what's the sort of story behind the conventional medicine when we come in and say, I want a health check?
Yeah, look, most GPs will just run very basic screening panels and they don't really look at the more advanced tests. I'm not entirely sure why. Perhaps maybe there's, an issue with burdening the Medicare system and the cost of these tests and so on. But it's not uncommon for me to see a very underpowered blood test that doesn't really show you all the information you want to see. So that's pretty common. And, in contrast, we use a lot of biomarkers in our panels just to try to understand as much about what's going on internally as possible so that we can really try to make sense of the presentation. And then with that information, we can then direct them down the right type of pathway.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. I think that's one of the things too, we can go to our doctor and I think two common ones I can think of is one, we go and get our cholesterol tested and they're looking at LDL, HDL and triglycerides and maybe total cholesterol. Okay, it paints a little bit of a picture, but it's really not diving deep enough into, our cholesterol, but also, our metabolic health, our insulin levels, our inflammation levels, which are higher markers in terms of, cardiovascular risk and heart disease than this total cholesterol marker. So they could say that, your cholesterol's fine right now, nothing's wrong. But if you've got other markers, like you say, these patterns that are sort of connected, they could be well off the mark. Or they could say, okay, your cholesterol's really high right now and you should take a statin, but the other markers that you've got there are showing that you're actually quite healthy and you probably don't need to be on a statin to do that. So we can get this sort of fear put on us about, certain markers that might be high, but they're not actually an issue, or certain markers that might be low that are an issue. If we're not looking deep enough into the information. I think thyroid test is another one. The thyroid test that you get from your doctor is so high level. They're only just testing, TSH, maybe T4, T3, but they're not digging deeper into the thyroid health. And you're not really seeing or getting a good picture of, what the thyroid's doing. Another question popped up when you were going through, all these things that could go wrong. I think it's be good to paint a picture. What's the typical history we're seeing with men that are doing this? What are the causes or the things that they could have been doing through that lifestyle, let's say in their 20s and 30s, that could push these markers into a position that they need to be concerned about, or that give them this low drive, this low fatigue, these symptoms you were talking about?
Yeah, awesome question. I had to chuckle there because I was just remembering my youth and my university years. I was
We've all been there, mate.
Okay. Look, it's essentially just the modern environment, the modern day diet and lifestyle, stress levels, sleep quality, lack of physical activity. We can unpack like any aspect of that in their own podcast, respectively.
Yes.
But I think a lot of men, they have a poor diet. They just eat highly processed and refined foods, a lot of sugar and like seed oils, and they're not meeting their requirements for key nutrients. Low protein intake is often the case, relatively high carbohydrate, and this is going to disrupt their sort of blood sugar and metabolic health. Then there's, I guess the majority of people I see are generally relatively inactive, so they're maybe just desk workers and they're not really moving their body enough. So lack of activity and physical exercise is a key factor here. On the flip side, some people are like very active, perhaps maybe even too much so. So that's an interesting one. Sleep deficiency or poor quality sleep deprivation essentially is pretty huge. Like a lot of men that I speak to are barely getting 6 hours of sleep each night, and the sleep that they do get is very fragmented and restless and so on. So that's going to contribute significantly to their metabolic health and their energy and their mood and so on. And there's different reasons why that might be. Some of them just enjoy staying up late, watching Netflix, or perhaps they got kids, and when they're in bed, they've got that evening to finally unwind, but they've got a really early start in the morning, so they just don't give themselves enough sleep opportunity. So sleep issues and circadian rhythm disruption is a big one. And then stress, I would say, mental, emotional stresses, the stress of running businesses, finances, relationships, kids, and the rest of it, all have its impact. And in many cases, it's a lot of those stress drivers that are impacting sleep quality, dietary choices, lack of time and not being able to commit to an exercise program and so on. So I guess they're the kind of like key areas I see the most. There's also a lot of people that have digestive issues, like poor gut issues, usually due to stress and poor diet and so on. But it's going to challenge their ability to digest and absorb nutrients, basically. And it's a massive driver for systemic inflammation. And there's literally a relationship between gut health and every system of the body, including the brain. So a lot of mental health challenges can stem from here as well. So I would say that's kind of like 5 of the key things, really.
Yeah, beautifully. I like it, mate. I think a lot of guys can probably relate to that. Like, okay, yeah, I can admit I haven't been eating the healthiest diet, and maybe I have been overtraining or undertraining. My sleep's definitely terrible. I do stress a lot, especially at this point in our lives, because we've got a lot of responsibilities with family, with work, with finances. It all sort of adds up, and it can take its toll. I think it's good to point out, it's sort of like death by paper cuts. Like, we can get away with this for a certain amount of time if we're not getting sleep because work's busy, or maybe we've not got the best diet for a little bit of time. We get away with that for a little bit, but then over time, if we don't address that, it starts to accumulate. And obviously these blood markers, they don't just change overnight, but over time we start to see these numbers shift. And the earlier you can get on top of these numbers and the earlier you can see these shifts, obviously you can start to make changes to impact these shifts, whether they're dietary changes, whether it's physical exercise, whether you're starting to manage your stress through meditation, breath work, sauna, lots of different things that can obviously help improve your health status. And that's another reason why I think it's important to, and if you agree, Rick, would be to get these done, this blood work done regularly, if not annually, at least every couple of years, because it's not just about where you are now, that line in the sand of, okay, this is my blood markers, this is where I'm at, but if you're getting it done on a regular basis, we can start to see trends, or we can start to see the shifts that are happening in terms of these blood markers, allowing us to step up and take control. Is that something that you see with a lot of your clients, Rick? And how often would you say, some of this blood work should be done?
Yeah. Okay. So, you can't fix what you don't know is happening, right? So I think, taking a look inside and getting checked out is always a good thing to do. The devil you know is always better than the devil you don't know in most scenarios. So I'm a big advocate of regular blood work. You want at least a good baseline. So if you haven't really done much blood work, or previous blood work hasn't really been that comprehensive, then a baseline assessment is a really good starting place. You can see where you're at. And then periodic testing to just track and monitor progress over time, at least on an annual basis, maybe even as often as 3 or 6 months, especially if you're trying to chase something or influence something that's perhaps abnormal. So I think you can't go wrong with regular blood work. But like we said earlier, it's about the interpretation of blood work, because oftentimes markers won't be outside of the conventional range and everything looks kind of normal. But if you know what you're looking for and you can look at patterns between markers, you can pick things up way before they start to manifest.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. I like it. Let's dig a bit deeper, because like we said, there's a lot of tests that we can do here. And obviously we're not going to dive in and do all the tests at once. Like that's going to be a waste of money and probably a waste of time. We've got to start somewhere, and then we've got to sort of start to figure out, okay, this is the pattern, this is what I'm seeing. And then maybe from those results, we could go deeper, or maybe, those high level results that we are getting give us enough of an insight into the changes that we need to be made. So I'd like to touch base with you and sort of say, okay, what are some of the key tests that you would do for a guy in midlife who comes in and he's feeling maybe a little bit low on energy, feels like he's a little bit off? Where are we going to start?
Yeah, I would say, for a good baseline, you do want to be fairly comprehensive from the start. And then depending on what comes out of range or what kind of issues you're dealing with, you can then maybe do repeat testing that's a little bit more focused just to track those particular markers. So you don't have to do comprehensive blood repeats every time. But there are certain markers on a comprehensive panel that I'm, very interested in, especially with men. Obviously, being men, we're quite interested in what our male hormones are like. So getting a good sex hormone panel is a good place to begin. So the markers we're looking at here are typically going to be total testosterone, free testosterone, the sex hormone binding globulin, looking at estrogen, the pituitary hormones that signal the testes to produce testosterone and sperm, the LH and the FSH, quite useful. So that kind of like male hormone panel is always going to be typically included. And then because cardiovascular disease and metabolic issues are a big risk factor for death in men, unfortunately, heart disease is a lead killer still. I'm very interested in looking at their lipid panel, but not just the standard panel. So, going back to what you said earlier, the standard lipid panel is highly nuanced when you look at it, if you're not knowing what you're looking at. But so I will run total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and look at the ratios between those. But I also quite like looking at the apolipoproteins, which give you a much better indicator of cardiovascular risk, because you're not just measuring the cholesterol within the particles that carry around cholesterol in the body. You're actually looking at an inference of the particle numbers, and it's the particle numbers as opposed to the cholesterol content that are more associated with our risk. Also, we're looking at blood sugar markers. So rather than just a fasting glucose, which is often all that's run on a basic panel, we want to be looking at fasted insulin levels. We want to be looking at the average glucose level over a few months. So that's the hemoglobin A1C test. There's some others as well. Then there's also some really interesting kind of ratios that we can calculate based on those standard blood sugar markers. So that's really important. I'm also really keen on looking at any sort of type of inflammatory activity. So we will often be using the high sensitivity form of C-reactive protein. And then we're going to be screening for liver function, looking at AST, ALT, GGT, and so on, looking at kidney function, looking at the electrolytes, looking at all the typical markers on a basic blood chemistry, key nutrients like vitamin D, zinc status, B12, folate, magnesium, etc. And then looking at the red blood cells and white blood cells as well, just to check for patterns of anemia, patterns of, immune challenge, and so on. So that will cover, I guess, the main thing. The other thing I missed was probably looking at iron levels and looking at things like the serum iron, the storage form of iron, ferritin, and some of the other iron markers, because a lot of men, they actually have a lot of inflammatory activity, and we can sort of pick up some of that pattern in iron studies. But also, men actually quite often will present with high iron status, iron overloaded. And that can that can lead to a lot of oxidative stress and inflammation in the body. So we sort of screen for that as well. That would kind of cover the main things in a pretty comprehensive panel, I would say.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. That's good to hear. Yeah, I was one of those men that had high iron, but I've got hemochromatosis, so my genes actually make me store more iron. And it's such a simple fix. Like if I've got high iron, I can just go and donate blood and it's going to bring my iron levels down. But if I didn't know that I had high iron, then it's going to affect my health and it's just under the hood and I'm never, ever going to see it. So it can make me feel fatigued. It can make me feel drained. It can affect my physical and mental performance. There are so many impacts just from having a high iron. And you said it before beautifully, like it's just about that awareness, or it's, the unseen devil. You want to be able to have a good look at these markers so that you can make, educated decisions about how you can impact it. And it could be something as simple as just donating blood that's going to turn your health around and improve your longevity, your brain focus, everything that's just going to impact just off one marker that I can talk about through personal experience, which is just so powerful. And it's just a shame that our healthcare system isn't more proactive, and we're not encouraging more men to be proactive with their health and check out these markers.
Yeah, I hope it changes, and I think there's going to be a shift and more demand from patients really for an approach that's a little bit more along these lines. In fact, functional medicine was originally developed by doctors, 30, 40 years ago now, because they saw the kind of, I guess, the inadequacies in that conventional model. I think in some respects, modern medicine's been hijacked by pharmaceutical interests, and a lot of the, the cutoffs and so on are going to qualify for pharmaceutical drug prescription and so on. And the diagnostic criteria is often geared around when can somebody be given a medication. And unfortunately, you don't often see doctors working with a prevention approach in mind. But it's changing. There's a lot of integrative doctors now. There's a lot of functional medicine doctors in training. And I do think the tide will turn with this.
Yeah, exactly. I think more and more people are paying more attention to their health now because our health has just been declining. Like the risks of cardiovascular disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, like everything's just on that climb. We're just getting sicker and fatter and more overweight. And obviously it's having a huge impact on our health and well-being. And I think more and more people are waking up to the idea that drugs are not the solution. If I go to my doctor, he's just going to give me a drug, my conventional doctor, and it's really not going to make me feel that much better in the long run. What alternative medicine is out there? What other steps? And I think people are getting more curious with that. And that's partly what I hope to do with Midlife Mavericks is just help guys to be able to connect with the importance of their health and understand that, doing simple blood work or making simple lifestyle changes can have a huge impact on their overall health and well-being. Let's dive in a little bit because I suppose the next question on top of guys' minds when they hear this is going to be cost. So let's talk a little bit about the cost of these tests, Rick.
Yeah, so first of all, if you can get your GP to run these tests, they can cover it through Medicare, so it doesn't really cost you anything more than just a doctor's visit. The challenge with that sometimes is that the GP, because of the restraints that they have and the paradigm that they work within, they don't always agree to run all the tests and some of those more advanced markers. Then in some cases they do. So one thing you can consider is requesting blood markers from your GP and hope that they agree to assist you in running those. But the other option is to actually use a direct-to-consumer lab that you can actually just go and buy your own blood work through. So there are various companies out there. I use a company called iMedical, imedical.com.au, and you can literally just build your own blood test. There's custom panels. I've got my own kind of panels that I've built with them through the clinic. And you can purchase comprehensive blood work and add all the advanced markers. The challenge there, though, is that it's at an out-of-pocket expense and it can rack up quite quickly, right? But I would say you can get a really decent comprehensive panel, probably starting around the sort of $300-400 mark, and you can go all the way up to, close to $1,000, depending on what sort of markers you're looking for. But I would say, roughly about maybe between $400-600, you're going to get yourself a really comprehensive panel. And then should things flag up and you want to be following things, you don't necessarily have to do the full panel again. You might just measure some of those key markers that were out of range that you're monitoring.
Yeah, I like it, mate. I think, guys will go out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a holiday or multiple thousand, tens of thousands of dollars on a car or all this sort of stuff. We're easy to spend money on material things, but how much do we invest in our health? And when you think about that, like spending $400-600 or even $1,000 on your health to be able to get all this stuff back, it's pretty cheap in reality. And the impacts that this could have on your life is going to be amazing. So it's a worthwhile investment, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to say, like, think about it this way. Imagine you, weren't aware of, say, a significant disease process manifesting over time. And then all of a sudden you cross that magic line and now you're diagnosed with, say, I don't know, type 2 diabetes. And maybe it's so far gone that you're going to have to be managed with medication, perhaps even including insulin. And then there's the financial burden and the quality of life impacts it's going to have on yourself, on society and the medical system. And then, so the overall lifetime management of, say, a problem and all the other kind of comorbidities that might come along with that type of diagnosis are going to rack up a lot over time. And it might seem expensive to purchase a $1,000 or $500 test, up front. But if that information that you get is going to highlight some areas of concern before they've been diagnosed as a disease, you have the opportunity to change the trajectory of that, of the course of your health, essentially. And the long-term cost savings, I think, are pretty obvious.
Going to pay for themselves for sure, mate. Exactly.
Still investing in health for sure.
Yeah, I like it. There's this saying I've heard, or maybe I read it somewhere. It was like, a healthy man has 1,000 wishes, and an unhealthy man has one. And it's like that, isn't it? We can put our health off to that point and just keep living our life and doing all the incredible things that we want to do. But then when we're diagnosed with a life-threatening disease or something that's going to impact us like that, we just wish that, I wish I was healthy again.
Yeah.
And getting on top of it, we could change our life.
Don't wait for a crisis to take some action. Be proactive and get it done. I think once you're in your midlife, I think what's the age where you tend to get sent out the test kit for colon cancer? It's like 45 or something like that. It's just a routine thing. They're just going to be screening people because at this sort of age range, colon cancer risk increases. You kind of want to approach like that. Like, just get yourself a good blood test. Yesterday was probably the best time to get it, and then move forward with your health with information.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. Really, really good. All right. So part of the reason why we're doing this podcast is because you and I are going to set up a little project together. It's going to be over a month. We're looking to start it in sort of mid-April. And we want to get a whole heap of guys on board with this who are curious about their blood markers, who want to do the work. Okay. They want to look under the hood. They want to, be proactive with their health. They're going to get these tests done. So what we're going to do is, Rick's going to jump on. He's going to do a live call with all of us. He'll, answer any of your questions. He'll talk about the tests that, you should be getting done. He'll even, put together a letter to your doctor that you can take to your doctor, listing all of the blood markers that we would like to see. Hopefully you can get your doctor to sign off on all of those, or at least some of those. Or if you want to be able just to go through an independent lab and you can just do these yourselves, you're more than welcome to as well. Once you've got all your results back, your conventional doctor, if you're going through him, will probably try to tell you that everything's fine and you're perfectly healthy. But you can send your results through to Rick, and Rick will generate a report for you with the functional ranges. And he will point out some of the key factors or highlight some of the things that you should be paying attention to. Those markers moving maybe in the wrong direction. And, this is going to be able to help you take action now and take control of your health before it is too late. Off the back of that, once we get all the results in at the end of the month, Rick and I will jump on a call and we'll do like a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got some questions about certain blood markers, it'll be your opportunity to, ask Rick. If you can't be on the call, you can pre-submit questions and we'll answer them on that call. It'll be recorded and you'll be able to get your results back. On top of that, if you want to do a private consult with Rick, so you've got your markers back and you'd like to go deeper, you'll be able to book in with Rick and have a private consult, and he can explain your markers one-to-one. And if you want to continue to work with Rick, you're more than welcome to as well. But it's just a really great way for us now in our midlife to be very proactive about our health and get on top of, these issues that could be arising if we don't take control of these. So I'm very excited about this, and I'm looking forward to connecting with lots of guys to bring them on board with this. And hopefully this can be an annual thing that we do so we can get more and more people in and we can really start to have an impact on men's health. Is there anything else you'd like to add to what I sort of just said, Rick?
I think it summed it up pretty well. The report that I provide is very comprehensive. It does a really good analysis of your blood work using these type ranges we're talking about, and it sort of picks up a lot of patterns, hidden health trends across all different body systems, including nutritional markers. And it will just be a really good way of assessing where you're at now. And then with the information, it will generally just steer you down lots of different pathways to help to get on top of things. So you'll find that really valuable. And the reports also provide the opportunity to be able to do comparative analysis in the future. So let's just say you repeat the test in 6 to 12 months, you can do a comparative analysis as well, and you can track, which way things are moving over time.
Yeah, very, very powerful, isn't it? I think the question will come up now would be like, okay, so I've done this work, I've got my results back, and, different markers are trending in different directions. Now what? And you probably get this a lot, Rick. Guys are coming into you and they're investing this money into doing this testing, and it's building awareness. It's given them a spotlight in a direction of, okay, these are things you need to start paying attention to. What are your next steps? How do you usually, work with men once these things come up? Yeah,
good. So it really, often it just depends on the presentation, the main complaints, the history, the symptoms, and also the blood work finding. So I guess it really just depends on what we're trying to work with. In my practice, I focus on what I call the pillars of health. So with pretty much every patient, we're going to be dialing in nutrition, physical activity, sleep hygiene, and stress management. And then depending on the type of things we see on blood work, we would kind of get much more specific and focus in on those areas. So let's just say, for example, we're dealing with a middle-aged man complaining of fatigue, weight gain, low libido, and just not thriving in life. On the blood chemistry, let's just say testosterone suboptimal. Maybe their estrogen's relatively increased. They have evidence of or markers and patterns indicating maybe they're insulin resistant and they're on that kind of road to diabetes, let's say. Say there's some key nutrient deficiencies and some raised inflammatory markers. What I'll be doing is making sure that the dietary pattern and the lifestyle factors and also targeted nutritional supplementation is all tailored based on those needs. So let's just say somebody is heading towards diabetes. Their fasting glucose is on the up. Maybe it's not quite high enough to qualify for a diagnosis, or the A1C is starting to creep up and their fasting insulin's elevated and they've got this insulin resistant and metabolic syndrome type of pattern. The dietary pattern is going to hopefully help to reverse those parameters. Typically, we might recommend restricting dietary carbohydrate, refined grains and sugars, emphasizing protein, making sure their blood sugar's stable and they're not getting spikes and crashes. If there are nutrient deficiencies, we can emphasize food sources, or we can use maybe targeted nutritional supplementation. If there's a lot of inflammatory activity, the question is, why? What are the inflammatory drivers in their lifestyle? Is it dietary? Do they have a gut issue? Are there other factors? And we would work to essentially apply anti-inflammatory strategies, whether that's just tweaks to the diet and lifestyle, or maybe using anti-inflammatory compounds and supporting them through that process. With testosterone itself, a lot of men do present with low or suboptimal testosterone levels. And the question is always like, why is it low in the first place? And it can vary. Some people just don't produce enough because of stress factors. The pituitary hormones aren't signaling the testes to produce enough. Sometimes it's due to sleep disturbances and chronic inflammation affecting these kind of communication pathways from the brain. A lot of time men will have adequate total testosterone, but their free hormone is very low. And it's that free hormone which is where the rubber meets the road. And that's the active portion of the hormone. So they're going to present with low testosterone activity despite producing enough. And this is often due to high levels of the binding globulin called sex hormone binding globulin, which can elevate for various reasons. Often it's due to stress and cortisol levels. It can be due to highly restrictive dieting, fasting too much, or even like too much low carb dieting even. So tweaking the parameters around the health and maybe using strategic supplementation to influence the particular pathways that are going on in their case. Another one to mention is a conversion of testosterone into estrogen. So as men, we don't have ovaries. We have estrogen, which is normal and healthy for our body, has numerous important functions. But if you're converting all of your testosterone into estrogen through an enzyme called aromatase, you're going to present with low testosterone symptoms and high estrogen symptoms. Typically, the boobs start kind of forming and that kind of stuff. And understanding what drives aromatase activity to drive that conversion is important, because we can then obviously modify those factors and help reduce the overconversion and then increase our testosterone through that means. So there's just a few things we think about around testosterone production.
Yeah, it's awesome, mate. What I like about that is it's just so powerful in the sense of like, it's an individualized approach. We're looking at your blood work and understanding what's going on for you, and then being able to give you some insights into dietary changes, exercise changes, stress management, lots of different lifestyle things that can help you. And I think a lot of men can be overwhelmed with all of the advice out there in the health and fitness and the well-being space because, okay, fasting, yeah, it can be good for you. Okay, there's lots of health benefits from fasting, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And if you've got low testosterone and you're not eating enough, that could be the cause. So just fasting all the time might not be healthy for you. I like how you said there sometimes, if we've got metabolic issues and we're, approaching that, type 2 diabetes, a low-carb diet is going to be a good option for you. But then on the opposite side of that, maybe if you're not eating enough and you're exercising a lot, then you might need more carbohydrates. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And we could say this, across the board with so many different health complications. And it's easy just to listen to a podcast or to read a book about a certain diet or a certain, workout regime or a certain XYZ, take an ice bath because it's going to be great for you. But it's not necessarily great for you. You need to understand how that's going to impact your body and what your current health status is. Because if you're a highly stressed out person, and there's a lot going on in your life and you can't manage stress, jumping into an ice bath is probably not going to be the best thing for you right now. You need to manage that stress, get your adrenals under control, and then maybe later on, that could be a beneficial thing for you. There's no one size fits all. And that's what I love about when we dive into the blood work, because it is individualized and it does allow you to go, okay, well, this is your blood work. This is what it says about you. Here is some of the facts instead of the generalized one-size-fits-all approach that you should eat this way or you should do X, Y, Z.
But functional medicine is like precision medicine, and everybody is an N of one, a unique individual, and they've got their own unique constellation of factors going on in their life based on their genetics and their lifestyle and so on. So we want to make sure that everything is geared up towards them as an individual. And when you've got symptoms, there could be a whole list of possibilities behind that. And functional blood work is a way of taking a long list of possibilities and trying to distill it down into a smaller group of probabilities so that you can be far more focused with your intervention. You don't have to just try everything willy-nilly, and just get lost with all the things. It's going to be much more precise and focused.
Yeah, for sure, mate. And I can attest to that because, like, being in health and fitness, I've experimented with lots of different training styles and I've experimented with lots of different diets and nutrition protocols. And, sometimes like I've stepped into ketosis and done ketosis with the blood monitor and checked my blood sugar levels and even measured my keto levels and all that sort of stuff. It worked a little bit for me and I felt good, but I also felt that I couldn't be doing CrossFit exercise when I was on the keto diet. That just didn't work for me. Some people reckon they can, but you dig into the science and the research and you find out about that. But then also you can start to look at it and go, okay, well, sometimes with our genes, we can have certain genes that make us react differently to saturated fat. So a diet really, really high in saturated fat might not be good for us. So that keto diet that everyone's raving about that works really well for them might actually have health impacts for me. And until we really look into that, we're not going to be so sure about that. So I think, the power in functional medicine and the power in this individualization is the future of health, and it's where we really need to be heading. And the more men that can get on board with this sort of stuff in their midlife, then I just think it's going to have such a huge impact on those later years. And it's about our health span, not just living longer, but it's those, that last decade of your life or even the last 20 years of your life. How do you want to be living? Do you want to be in pain? Do you want to have a disease? Do you want to be struggling to get out of bed in the morning and feeling like shit? Or do you want to live that active lifestyle and be there for your kids and your grandkids and be the nomad traveling around Australia, loving life, living your best life because you've got that opportunity to do it. And I think, this is such a critical point and we can take control over our health right now through this. So I'm excited to be doing this with you, Rick, and I'm, very grateful that you've come on board and you're going to be able to help us out with the testing and work with some of the Midlife Maverick guys. And I know that they're really going to appreciate it. So just big thank you to you, mate.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I want to say, look, midlife isn't just the beginning of the end. It really is an opportunity to be the start of your prime. So you just got to take control of your health and take action. Be responsible. Get stuck in.
Yeah, that's it. Awesome. All right. So if people want to learn more about you, Rick, and what you do, whereabouts can they find that information?
Sure. So I run a practice called the Health Formula, which I co-founded with my wife, Michelle, who's an osteopath. And we're based in Caulfield South, but we also consult via telehealth. So we work with pretty much anybody in Australia. You can check us out at thehealthformula.com.au. Our Instagram is the.health.formula. And you can just reach out to us. We offer discovery calls. You're more than welcome to email me at rick@thehealthformula.com.au.
Yeah, beautiful, Rick. Thanks for that share. And this is open not just to men in Australia. We're going to open it globally. So you don't necessarily have to be in Australia to jump on board with what we're about to do in April. If you're a man in midlife and you want to be proactive with your health and you want to dive into these markers and you want to start to take control of your health, this is for you. So jump on board with this. I'll be putting up some information on the website. I'll put a link below in this podcast where you can find that information, where you can book on to, this blood work analysis program that Rick and I are going to run. Sign up to that. As I mentioned before, it's going to be an initial call. You can ask some questions. Rick will talk about the blood markers. You get the letter. You go to your doctor. You'll do the blood tests. You get the results. We send them to Rick. He'll generate a functional range report for you and point out, the things that you should be paying attention to. And off the back of that, we'll have a Q&A call, a group call, where you can ask questions and get some information off Rick or myself. And we'll be able to help you out with that. And if you want to do a private consult with Rick and go even deeper into your blood work, then you're also welcome to do that. That's an additional cost. That's not part of what we'll be doing in the package. But I really strongly recommend this. I know that functional medicine and working with integrative doctor changed my life for the better. And I'm pretty sure that for most guys, something's going to come up and it's going to allow you to start to take action with your health. All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Midlife Mavericks podcast. If this episode hit home for you, don't just sit on it, take action. If you're a man in midlife looking to regain your strength, energy, and purpose, check out the Midlife Mavericks membership, a community of high-performing men committed to leveling up their health and lifestyle. No fluff, no excuses, just results. Start by taking the Midlife Assessment Scorecard, a quick tool to help you identify the key areas holding you back and what to do about it. Because if you don't track it, you can't improve it. Head to midlife-mavericks.com.au to take the scorecard and learn more about the Midlife Mavericks membership. If this episode helped you, share it with a friend. Iron sharpens iron. Let's build stronger men together. Until next time, take ownership, take action, and keep pushing forward.